Now we're going to open it up for questions, but I might also ask Lee, do you want to come up and join us? And Mehreen, do you want to come and sit here as well? We can all have a little chat together. If you can put your hand down between the questions, I'll come back to you and I'll try and remember who's where, but we'll keep it fairly informal.
Most of the, or all of the developers that have taken over and are funding things like WestConnex haven't been voted for democratically. In the same way, the leader of the Greens hasn't been voted for democratically. Do you think that we will get to a point where we can democratically elect our leader, and do you think that's a good idea?
Cool, thanks for that question, Emmalina. We might take a few more and then we'll come back to the panel. Cole.
Recently, the Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils got together and called on the state government not to invest in more motorways, but to invest in rail across Western Sydney, which would support the communities of Western Sydney. I was wondering, Scott, particularly if you and Lee and others might know about what's happening in the state, but the role of local government in supporting different kind of transport models, but also opposing motorways would be an interesting one. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Yep.
One of the things that makes the battle against the tollways so difficult is that it seems so irrational. For example, we know that a rail link between Wollongong and Sydney could be improved massively for a fraction of the price for the roadway that they're proposing to put in instead. Likewise, most of the cost of both WestConnex and NorthConnex and the Northern Beaches can be done much cheaper using heavy rail. The thing is, they don't want to do that. That's not the lobby they're dealing with. So how do you mount a rational argument when clearly the decisions are not rational? It goes back again to what we actually muster as power for ourselves.
I love that irrational one. I feel like it's really cold-bloodedly rational what's being done to us. It's not, I don't think it's rational. It's actually really calculated and very, very clever and systematic and awful, but I don't think it's irrational. The reason that stuff just keeps getting elbowed into the face is because the companies are on a gravy train and they like it. It's really hard to get them off. And one of the things that we've got to do, and it's hard, and it's why I think you need that moment of crisis or trauma that really shocks things, is that you need, within the public sector, you need an institutional, you need the equivalent institutional kind of setup for public transport as you have now for roads. For roads, these people have these tunnelling machines, they have all this heavy-duty equipment, they have all these people, they have very high costs. Their demand on government, as they pass through that revolving door, is another 10 kilometres this year, another 10 kilometres this year, another 10, don't care who we have to bulldoze to get it. And you need that kind of institutional inertia for public transport. You know, like a big internal public sector lobby for light rail and rapid bus networks and cycling, where every year they go into their budget review committee and they're like, no, screw roads, we're doing very fine here. And that's like a wholesale internal restructure. Which we don't have at the moment, and the roads people have all of that. The local government role, maybe I'll leave that to folk who are a bit closer.
I was just going to say, maybe we jumped in, because I think, Mehreen, you might want to come in on that one, but also local government, and then we can come back.
I don't want to forget that one.
No,
so
it's all
don't
good.
worry.
We'll come back and then we'll stick in this theme or go.
Yep. So, Cole, I think that was a real watershed moment when the Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils actually came out, and they did come out during the tolling inquiry, so we had quite a bit, long back and forth with them. And what was really exciting to see was that they just didn't come out on the angle of, Western Sydney kind of missing out on public transport, but they actually framed it as an issue of social justice as well, which was really exciting to see. Because what they pointed out, which is absolutely true, is that it is people who live the furthest away from the city who will pay most for tolls to come in for jobs in the city or elsewhere, in the south. And so that point of view, which many had been talking about for a while, is why not improve the livability of Western Sydney? Why not improve public transport in Western Sydney, which provides opportunities for hundreds of thousands of jobs as well? And up to now, I think both Jenny and I and many in the community had tried to engage with the community in Western Sydney, but exactly as Scott said, the government had spent a lot of PR money into just saying, well, this is what we're giving you. There's no other alternative. So, while we were sitting there, I got a response to one of my tweets saying, oh, well, if we don't have WestConnex, then we have no way to travel. So that's exactly the argument that was being pitched, which is such a false argument. And I think we can really build on what those Western Sydney Regional Council have said and are doing.
Yeah, great.
I might come back to you, Scott, for that one, and then open it up to Lee if she wants to respond to any of those. No?
On the other one, the election. So when this first came up, like maybe 2 years ago, or first in my memory, it might. Yeah, but we dealt with it a bit before that, like when the constitution was being redone and we'd formed up national council. There was an argument that was running about, well, why not this? We have ballots at many other levels of our internal structure. Why not this as well? I was really against it because what it felt like it would create would really harden up factions within the membership, that you'd end up with people running leadership campaigns instead of stop the toll road campaigns. And I actually thought that'd be quite harmful to us as an organisation. The more I've thought about it, I feel much more on the fence now, and I'm actually quite looking forward to seeing how the party handles that debate over the next little while. I just feel like we've got to step into it a little bit carefully. You need to balance up what the party wants and who the party thinks is best in that position. You've also got to remember that we're trying to do leadership a bit differently. We're trying to do it without too many kind of figurehead archetypes at the top. This is an organisation which we really want leadership to kind of emerge from the bottom up rather than being too focused on an individual person. And the less time we spend, quite frankly, talking about ourselves and the more time we spend talking about capitalism and what the hell is being done to our planet, the happier I'll be. So I just feel like now I'm actually much more open to the arguments on different sides than I probably would have been about 2 years ago.
Welcome, Lee Rhiannon. Wonderful to have you here at the Petersham Bolo. Feel free to make some general comments or respond to the questions.
How is Palestine? Can I?
Well, no, thanks. I would like actually to start on Palestine. Like, you know, when you go overseas and you come back in 24 hours, the world changes. Just a bit over 24 hours, I was not far from Al-Aqsa Mosque, where the Israelis are again trying to perpetrate a takeover of the old city and literally move across to Jordan. I was there about 4 years ago, and the continuation and the extent of the Israeli occupation and the surrounding of Jerusalem is just extraordinary, on a much more military footing than I've seen before. So it's good to be here, but I appreciate the question, Scott, because it's just really troubling how long that's got on. And just one more thing I would like to say, it relates to, I was thinking of it when Jenny was speaking about housing. I just saw house demolitions. Like, imagine just moving in, the council says you can't build there and just goes and knocks your house down. That actually happens. Like, that's just happening all the time. And it's again another example of the occupation and a reminder of how important our voice is. Because when you're there, they so value that people go. I was with a Scottish National MP doing a tour. They feel so isolated, and international solidarity means everything. So yeah, lots to talk about, and we'll be coming back to that one. And if you want to talk to me about it later, I'd really value it. On Amelina's question about leadership, I was really interested in Scott's question because there's so many ways of coming at this, and we are under criticism because at the moment the Australian Greens is one of the few parties in the Western world that doesn't have some form of democratic election of their leader. But Scott also nailed some issues about the type of party we are, how we go about it. And there are different models being thrown around. Is it just that all members get a vote? Is there some weighting, like you have in some of the Social Democrat parties, with the MPs having some weighting and the members having some weighting? Or is it one of our bodies that's where people are elected to, and they also get a say, like our National Council? So I think they're really worth considering because they are big issues. There is, we don't have a leader in the Greens New South Wales, but we have one federally, and some of the other states have them. So basically, I think we're at the point we need to get the conversation going. I feel that it does need to change. I've been on the record of saying that previously. So thanks for that. Cole, for your question about local government, and I think in transport, I think you might have been, I might have misunderstood it a bit, but in Queensland, there's local governments that have brought in light rail. The light rail's their own project. So there's a lot that local councils can do. And I think the locals would know better than I would is about the fact, I think from what it seems is a pretty good opposition to WestConnex. And Clover, I think Clover, what she's done, putting that on the record, like that's a huge contribution. But in this day and age, and it's a credit to the community. Why do politicians go out there and do that? Because the community, they see it's wrong, but the community pushes them.
Do you believe that the state government was deliberate in sacking our councils in the West to stop that? To stop our campaign?
So yes, Cole. Yes. Was there a link between the fact that we saw all of our inner West councils all join in their opposition with the City of Sydney Council to oppose WestConnex, and then all of a sudden they got sacked and they appointed administrators? Yeah, I think you could probably assume that yes, there was some very, very cynical approach to that. I still remember being very heavily pregnant, if I can put in an anecdote, and sitting and meeting the inner West Council administrator for the first time. And apparently, without me being aware, I was looking quite evilly at him while rubbing my belly. And my colleague Jamie Parker said, "I'm not sure if you realise you're doing that, Jenny, but it looked quite full on." So my first interaction didn't go so well, but that's all right. He changed his tune. He realised what I was telling him, which was basically it doesn't make it possible for you to not oppose WestConnex and be the head of this council. He eventually saw the light on that. I'm going to throw it back open for questions. There was one, just you here.
Scott, thanks for your service to the country and your honesty. This is not related to... Not related to livable cities, but I think it's something on everyone's mind, and is what's next? Is there a joint plan to come back?
We'll take that one by itself. You
Like
can
that.
answer
No fucking way. It's certainly not in the short term. Like, it's actually quite a toxic workplace, and anybody who's spent any time in Parliament or working for an MP will know it's an abusive workplace in some areas. Like, if you took it completely out of context and said, I just spent my last 90 minutes being screamed at by really awful people, you'd call somebody in to make that stop. So there's elements of it that I really won't miss. There's elements of it that I absolutely love and adore that I'm going to miss terribly. But I feel as though for the next this is as far as I've thought it through. I don't have a good answer for this, I'm sorry. As far as I've thought it through, the next 3 months, I feel like my main responsibility is just to help do what I can to steady the ship in WA and make sure that transition is smoothing. I love Jordan Steele-John. He's exceptional. He's a really exceptional young man. And kind of that helped a bit. We're not going to need to go through some kind of pre-selection thing. So a couple of months, I feel like, to just help that handover and that transition. And also with colleagues, like people, when me and Larissa fell out, that increases the workload on Lee and Richard and everybody else. That's one of the most brutal things about it. So being available for that kind of thing. And it turns out that there is a sustainable cities element to your question, because that's what I want to do. The most profound unfinished business that I feel like I've got, which I didn't really have time to do, was all that WA 2.0 stuff that I was riffing off before. The city stuff is heavily visual. Like, I've done a lot of graphics for it, a lot of modelling, a lot of animation, that kind of work to be able to show Bob what your damn street looks like in your green future. And the last time I had a really good go at that was 2013. And so I'm going to go back to being a designer and an animator for a couple of months and be able to hand that off to the party, not just the local crew, but nationally as well. If people want to use it, they can. And I would feel better having done that. And then after that, I don't know, it's a big planet. And there's many other ways to make a contribution, as you all know. So we'll see.
Lee, thank you for coming back from Palestine safe and sound, and your honesty, unlike the head of the State Liberal Party in Victoria, who was reported in the Israeli running the same old Zionist line that, you know, basically all those terrorists need to be killed immediately. Thank you for your honesty. I'm very confused on the state level when it comes to state governments building light rail. Something has to happen and needs to be supported. However, I live on the Bankstown line. It doesn't matter what time of day you catch that train. It's busy, chock-a-block busy. It's one of the busiest train lines, Bankstown to Sydenham. And yet the government's proposing to close that line, sell it to a private company, which I think is a Hong Kong-based company, that is going to rip that line apart, close St. Peter's railway station.
And Erskineville.
And that's it. And then rebuild the whole thing with massive, all along the corridor, high-rise buildings and shopping centres, which is similar to what they've done in Hong Kong.
No schools, no football fields.
Cole, you have
So
to stop
I want to
chatting.
know from the state representatives, what is the conversation that's going on around that in Parliament, if there is? I know that Labor Party is really piss weak on a number of levels, but what are they thinking? Are they thinking, I mean, is there a Labor Party that's opposing anything? And is there a way of bringing that discussion forth? Because as far as I'm concerned, that and WestConnex go hand in hand. Could someone enlighten me, because I don't know whether I should support that or not support it? Is it good to have light rail but then eliminate the existing one? Is it good to have a private one and eliminate something that my tax has paid for?
I might let Mehreen answer that, and we might just take that on its own, and then we'll come back for a couple more questions. I just wanted to put it in context in terms of saying we've got this bizarre, because I saw Scott a couple of times going, we have this bizarre situation where we basically have what are supposed to be public transport projects that we should really love in the inner city, but they seem to be stuffing them up so badly.
Oh, New South Wales.
We're just amazing. I have actually said to the Transport Minister in New South Wales, you are delivering a light rail into a community that is most in love with public transport in Surrey Hills, and you've managed to piss them all off. Like, how do you even do that? Like, it's impossible to understand. But Mehreen knows a lot more of the detail, and we should let her answer that.
Yeah, that's all right. Thanks, Jenny, and I'll try and answer it briefly. But I think this goes to the point of what Scott said earlier as well, or alluded to, that this government has a very well thought through agenda. It's just not an agenda for providing good public transport. It's an agenda for privatization. And that's exactly what this conversion of the Bankstown line is. So it's actually the same thing that's happening on the Chatswood to Epping line, which is part of the North West Rail Link, the same metro that will now continue on to Bankstown. And that line was completed in 2009, I think, at the cost of $3.4 billion. And now they're ripping it out and building over it to hand it over to a private operator. It's exactly the same thing happening. And the Minister for Transport, Andrew Constance, has recently said that his vision is, and he sees this happening, that in 10 to 15 years the government will not be in the provision of transport, that it'll all be private. So it's quite clear, it's not even a hidden agenda now. It's quite clear. And I think I wrote a piece on that agenda about 2 years ago, actually talking about the Bankstown line, and I think it's a great opportunity for our local council candidates, and we're doing quite a few actions, standing out at train stations and making people aware of what's happening. The irony of the situation is that MTR, the Hong Kong company that is going to be providing all these services, that is going to take hold of these services, is actually owned in majority share by the Hong Kong government. So in effect, it'll be the Hong Kong government running services here.
So it's sort of
Exactly. So exactly. That's a nice link. So what I'm saying is they have a company which is owned by the public. So it's just so skewed. This whole thing is so crazy. But it does come down to a way of thinking, an ideology of how it's a neoliberal ideology pretty much panning out. Labour isn't doing much on it. But we have been doing it, and we are going to kind of roll out another big campaign about it as well.
Cool. So I'm going to take three, just here, and then at the back there, and then Julie.
What you were saying about the local councils having so much of an effect, and I know in South Miami Council they said all developers must now have solar panels, for example. So is it kind of up to us to really, I mean, in Ballina and Byron Bay have had enormous success with the Greens Council and on board. So is it up to us to kind of connect with our communities and start off that way? Because I know that there's councils that are merging and councils that have been able to stop the merge from happening. To kind of stop the state government and go, actually, no, you can't do that. We're going to insist that developers have one, social apartment, social development, or social housing development per, 10 apartments that they build, and kind of take it from the ground level, stop them from council level from going ahead with these privatisations. What? Is that going to be more effective than kind of trying to change the minds of the state government, I guess?
All right. We're going to take a few, and then we'll come back to that. I'm making notes in case everyone else gets... Yeah, here.
Thanks very much, Scott. First of all, everyone has got to come in behind the Save the Buses campaign. That is really linked, of course, to the whole question of WestConnex and the privatisation program, which this government wants to sell everything, whether it's tied down or not. And anyway, I just wanted to raise a question about the where we go, what sort of demands and tactics we want to raise with the anti-WestConnex campaign. One of the key things that happened in Victoria and Western Australia was that the movement managed to force the Labor Party just before an election campaign to accept the demand, scrap the contracts. And I think that's really essential, that we've got to be looking at how we're going to, put more and more pressure, I'm not just saying, from individual cases, but mass pressure from all over Sydney and on the Labor Party to scrap these contracts. And even though it supposedly ends up costing you money, what happened in Victoria, the pressure was such that the companies that signed those contracts were given alternative work. And that's how the state government can get out of that argument. The Labor Party says, oh, it will cost us too much. Well, there are ways around that, and they've done that in Victoria, and I think also in WA.
Great. I'm going to take one more question, and then I'll come back and let these guys all respond to all or some, or say something completely different if they choose to. Go for it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering how much of, describe the loss of democratic space, the fact that our democratic processes have been brought up by corporations, the whole crazy spiel of in 15 years we won't have anything to do with transport or anything else. How much of that is a failure of, I guess, us in the collective of failing to tell the story about public is good, about reclaiming the space for a public works department, for a public, public everything. And because we have, and I understand media's a problem and money's a problem and we got problems. But how much of it is us failing to continue to step up and talk about how public transport is good, public services are good, public works are a great department to hang on to in all sorts of ways. So partly it's a silence on our part. Discuss.
Right, Scott, I'm going to come to you. We had the power of local government stand up to state government, solar, what they can do to kind of lead the way. We had bus privatisation. We had forcing the ALP to scrap the contracts, and public is good. Someone said to me the other week, I'm in the Greens because I like public stuff. And I liked that as a description.
How much longer do we have? There's such rich, wonderful stuff in there. So really quickly, the local government stuff I think is really powerful and should never be disregarded, partly because it's a tier of government that we're actually pretty good at getting good organisers and good representatives onto. It's accessible. And also it gives you that certain amount of institutional clout. The last time that I was here, the City of Sydney had some campaigners and researchers at the, I forget what it was called, like the little tent city that we went to in the park, who were doing this really beautiful research and economic analysis and that kind of stuff because they were getting paid to do it by a tier of government that we're actually not too bad at getting people onto. So I think it's really powerful, partly because we can access it, and partly because it gives you a certain amount of institutional standing. Same goes with the West Rock stuff. I think that kind of thing is really important. With the ALP, and I know there's such a sticky bunch here, but it's the same everywhere, and it's the same in Victoria. They will only respond to the politics. And what we know is that there's really decent, thoroughly good people inside the ALP, including at reasonably senior levels, whose work is counterbalanced, neutralised, and turned into total mediocrity by the kind of neoliberal right. I can't even figure their factional shit out. I really cannot. Martin Ferguson was from the left, right? So anyway, and the kind of net effect of all of that is just complete mediocrity, and they only responded when we hit critical mass. It was the same in Victoria. And Victoria was after the election, and WA it was just before. They got sick of us saying, under what circumstances would you build this freeway? And they responded to that. Probably after a meeting involving a bunch of polling data. Certainly wasn't after a walk through the impact area. And then the last one, public is good. I think, look at what Corbyn just almost managed to pull off. Something powerful, like people just out and out saying, you know what, we call bullshit. We call bullshit. This whole paralysis of democratic practice by private capital, we call bullshit on it. We are done. And we're proud of public housing, we're proud of public health, we're proud of public transport, we're proud of public schools. And we don't have to be embarrassed. We don't have to hide and kind of shield ourselves and say, oh, maybe some privatisation is good. And kind of taking that, you know, kind of quite deep old practice and meshing it with really interesting new democratic forms, stuff that's enabled by the internet, by, you know, representative democracy and public stuff has its problems. But let's reinvent, you know, let's create that new, much more direct and deliberative forms of democracy and not be embarrassed or awkward about it.
Lee, do you want to respond to those
thanks very
things?
much. The local government one is a really good question, but we've got a huge problem that local government has been stripped of so much of its power, and not just by the current Conservative government, Liberal National State government, by Labor as well. This weakening has gone on forever, and what's gone hand in hand with that is a weakening of the planning laws. Off the back of the Green Ban movement, which is one of the great wonders of the world, is that we had the Planning, Environment and Assessment Act. Comes in 1979, ran at the time, paid tribute to the Green Ban movement and Jack Mundy for the work that they did, because the foundation of that act was public consultation. Because that's what had come out of the hundreds of resident action groups that have been formed. Sort of a period a bit like now where, you know, sort of the public was just sick of being ripped off. The public got organised, resident action groups, Green Ban movements, bringing together a whole lot of people. So this act comes in, really good planning laws, not perfect, but world class. When I was in state parliament, every year amendments will come in to weaken that. And that's what's happened. Now it's really gone, and now we've just got these terrible planning laws. But a period, what also was happening, that, and it goes to some of your points about environmental measures, that they brought in these systems called basics, where that you have to, there were certain requirements if you were building, for building, environmental standards that would have to go with that. Again, pretty weak, but at least a start. But they didn't strengthen it. They weakened it, and I think it's gone now. So this is the problem that we have, and a real reminder that, like, we, as parliamentarians, I'll say for myself, I love my job, but every day reminds you it's not with us where we get change. It's when collectively we're strong. It's just so important. About Jim's question about the about Labor and WestConnex and transport, again, it brings us to the issue of Labor. Like, this is one of the biggest problems that the progressive movement has. And I'm not a Tweedledee. I'm not saying Labor's the same as the Liberals at all. But Labor in opposition are a different beast from when they're in the government. They're often our best friend. They say often say exactly what we say, and the community wants to hear that, and understandably will want to believe it, and do believe it. Because, you know, this is what you're doing. It's about building campaigns, building action. So how do we lock them in? And I think the experience, I won't go on more, but I think this is something we've got to come back to, our tactics around Labor with regard to WestConnex. And then the third one was, Julie's public, fantastic question, Julie, and so beautifully put. The issue around public, it also comes to the Greens too in our own policies. But when I think back on it, I think that we could have actually talked a lot more about public over the last 10 years, being frank about it. Every time, like with light rail, I can remember people, our people, you know, sort of painting the tram tracks down the Randwick where there is now light rail going. But when I look back on it, we weren't talking about it being publicly owned and publicly run. And that's what, so they've come up with what they call public transport, but is it? No. And also publicly run, publicly owned, and a union workplace. So we need to be injecting this in at every stage and bring back a public works department.
I just wanted to go to the question of Labor as well, and I think we can't overestimate the role. I know that the community plays a huge role in kind of pushing Labor along, but the role that Greens play in pushing Labor along is massive. Like, for years, or it might even be decades, that we have worked with the unions, especially the RTBU. And I know that Alex Clausen's the head of the RTEU, often mentions Lee when she was in state parliament and the work that she did with the unions. And, you know, I'm pretty proud as well that I've continued on that work, actually running proactive campaigns with the RTBU to stop the privatization of public transport in Newcastle, to bring the rail line back up on the north coast. And so I think this time around, when the Inner West bus privatisation was announced, Jenny and Jamie jumped very quickly on that, and we organised a forum in support of not privatising the buses, which was massive. And then because of the past work that Lee had done, RTBU has really had us as the centre of the campaign, of their campaign. And I think that's pushed Labour to come out very quickly with the position of saying we're completely against privatisation. So I think that's a crucial role that the Greens have to play. And very quickly to Julie's question as well, Scott, you mentioned Portland. I have a lot of family in Portland, so I've gone there many times, and especially also to look at the issue of public transport there. Portland has fully publicly owned, publicly operated public transport. And I asked some of the heads of their public works departments. They actually have a huge public works department which has a huge number of experts and engineers who actually run that. And they put down their kind of publicly owned transport to two main factors. One, they said, was they've had sympathetic governments, progressive governments, but the big one was the community push to have that. That's how they got cycleways, that's how they got light rail, that's how they've got public housing. So they said those were the two main factors, but will never happen without a push from the public.
Absolutely. So we're going to wrap up. I'm sorry if there's more people with questions. You have one more.
Because I see this as a very deliberate social toxicity that's developing. And one is the hopelessness that it's instilling by doing the psychological removal of trees and denigrating of our green spaces. The sick beds and the sick suburbs that are going to be created from this, I think, are a huge concern. I think rather than reacting, they're anticipating there's going to be a public reaction, take care for the public. They're going to save the day, and I think they're going to try and offer to save the day by giving us a total cack hand. You know what the term cack hand means? What I am anticipating, if you look at those stacks, you see those big building sections that what are they? What are they? When they chop the trees down, they're not only psychologically trying to intimidate, they are also they're taking the heritage and the green space value away. I reckon, I'm proposing this because they're trying to then put development in there. I'm very worried that their cack hand offer is going to be, let's help you with affordable housing. We'll put high-rise affordable housing, we'll make these sick beds around these unfiltered stacks or semi-filtered stacks, whatever they are. They're going to have huge vibration too with those fans. And vibration alone can also have quite strong health effects. When I look at places like Carriage Works, the supported housing that went in there was the, what do they call it, applicants for supported housing. I think it was really a guise for guaranteeing rent to the landowners or the developers for allowing people of, with less income to go in there. That's not real affordable housing. Anyone that went to the Sydney Greater Commission, the launch, yes, all right, the Sydney Greater Commission, they said no development further than Parramatta for anything. They were criticised at the time, David Shoebridge was there and others, saying there is no strategic analysis of the kind of actual working class or supported accommodation needs. What I want from you is to anticipate their next move, this cack hand of affordable housing where all it's going to do is create more developments and it's going to just guarantee rent to whoever owns those developments.
Yeah, I think there's lots of complex questions there. What about?
Look, the housing's obviously a huge one, but really we just need to change how we see housing. It shouldn't be about making money. It shouldn't be a commodity. That has to be. Like, even if you send your kids to a private school and you've got private health care, you still understand that you need a public school system, you need public education. But for some reason, the way they've done housing, you've got to see it as a huge success of neoliberalism, that they've smashed public housing, it's seen as though it's for losers, and we've got to take that language back. And there's some great, I really pay tribute to the Waterloo, the folk down at Millers Point, etc.
Can I just jump in on that, Lee, and say if anyone wants inspiration on how the world should work, one of them was what Scott just visioned out for us about their Perth 2.0 plan. The other is the Waterloo Public Housing Action Group. If you know the IGA down in Waterloo, if you don't Google it, across the road from that, they somehow managed to get the state government to give them a space to organise the community response to what they're planning to do in Waterloo. So if you ever feel like you need a little bit of inspiration, go hang out with those guys for a bit.
Yeah, go for it. Also, yeah, no, I don't want to sit. I actually, this is Scott's first meeting as Scott, public person. We got it. We got it and has been sad and has been happy, and I will be thinking about it a lot, Scott, but that you're not going to be there is huge. It's huge for the public, it's huge for all of us. But there's many things to be said, but there was one thing I'll get you to repeat it, Scott, when I read about your press conference, your line about trouble. Seriously, you're going to keep causing trouble. I don't
think it was the brightest thing to say at a press conference, acknowledging such a massive fuck up, actually. But there are other ways to cause trouble. And, you know, I love these people. Your elected representatives obviously serve you well and they work their guts out. But, you know, there's so many other ways of creating trouble, and that's what I would like to be a part of.
And what I just want to build on that, because, you know, there's been a lot written about the Greens in the past few weeks, and a lot of it's just way off the planet. And one of the things that they try and say is that, you know, there's people, some of them might not be on this stage, who want it to be a protest party all the time and can't get their head around about being, you know, working to compromise, etc. That is so much rubbish. The MPs here, the MPs that I work with in federal parliament, the MPs in state parliament, that's what you do. You're there organising protests, joining protests, being part of it. You're going to parliament and you're working out how you can get a better deal for the people on the planet. So making that construct is one of the false ways they're trying to present the Greens. And when you hear Scott talk about trouble, that's what we do in different ways. And yes, there's a lot to debate and a lot to learn what it means to be a Greens party. But so many of those constructs are way off the mark. But mainly I wanted to say thank you so much, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
That's really kind. It also gave me a second to think about what you put to us just now and our experience in WA, and I feel like you put your finger on it as well, is that whatever they throw back, it will be an attempt to divide us. That'll be their thing. They might do it with carcinogenic public housing here. In Perth, what they tried to do is said to the neighbourhood crew who are going to have their houses flattened, oh, don't worry, we'll do a tunnel. And that was a way of trying to wedge them off against the bushland protectors and the Aboriginal mob who were trying to save the wetland. Whatever it is, it'll be something that will attempt to divide and demoralise us. So look after each other and stay strong and just keep turning up.
Yeah,
keep turning up.